I think we should get started because I'm conscious this is the last hour of the day and nobody wants to be here after 5 o'clock. And I'm sure there's quite a lot of thoughts people have been generating over the day, and I want to give the panel a chance to share their thoughts. So we'll get cracking. So I thought it might be useful just to remind ourselves of the context of the day. Actually, you could go to a slide on this. So the content of the Energy Wellbeing Evaluation Day today has all been put together from members of the Energy Hardship Evaluation Consortium, which is a group, most of you will be aware of that group, it's not necessarily all of you. Essentially, that was a group that came together informally to respond to the question of how best to do an evaluation of an energy hardship program. Actually, it was a program initially run by Scott Willis 2 years ago now already. So this group is starting to feel a little bit less informal, but it has served the purpose of, I guess the theme of collaboration came up a lot today, about the value of collaboration. So that's really what this group has been about, is supporting that collaboration in the absence of any formal structure for allowing that collaboration to happen in the very fast growing energy hardship alleviation, energy wellbeing space. So I thought we've got here a group of panelists who are members of the consortium. And I know that a lot of people in the audience are also from the consortium, so I very much want this to be a discussion with the panel, but also the room and the people online. We have Helen Viggers from the University of Otago's online as well as one of our panel members, so make sure that the people online can see us and hear us okay? Yeah, okay. So first of all, I might just log into my computer. Sorry, guys. I've got some notes here. I want to start by introducing who the panel is. So we've got Helen Viggers online, who you can see there. Helen is a research fellow with the Hei Kāinga Oranga Housing and Health Research Group at University of Otago in Wellington. Many of you familiar with the energy hardship space will know her work well. She is originally an engineer, but is now applying those skills to public health research, and is particularly interested in where the best levers are to change how easily New Zealanders accept having cold homes and the health consequences of that cold. So thank you for joining us, Helen. I'm going to go around the panel in a moment once I've introduced everyone, and get you all to say a few words about things that stood out for you during the kōrero today. But before that, I'll carry on and introduce Gareth Cartwright. Again, probably quite well known to everybody, but he is the Executive Officer for the Community Energy Network and has held that role for the last 6 years. CEN is a federation of community enterprise organisations that are based from Kaitaia to Bluff, so the whole of New Zealand, and their members are focused on alleviating energy hardship, helping everyone in their communities to adapt to climate impacts while reducing their emissions. And together those members have done a huge amount of mahi in this space. They've completed over 325,000 healthy homes assessments and over 150,000 retrofits. So thank you for joining us, Gareth. Sean Connolly is co-director of the OERC. So thank you very much for hosting this kōrero today. He's a senior lecturer at the School of Geography here at Otago, and his work focuses on community response to sustainability challenges. But locals may also know his name from the regular column that he does in the Otago Daily Times called Seeds for Change, which is around food sustainability. Yeah. And finally, Mel Panda is my colleague at MB, but in a different team. Mel's a principal analyst in the markets evidence and insights team. So working on the indicators of energy hardship, as you know, as we heard about today, but has been in the research and evaluation field for over 20 years. Previously, he's worked largely in the health sector. Is that right? At the school, Fiji School of Medicine, College of GPs in New Zealand, and also ACC. So I just want to make sure you got a proper introduction, because I'm going to ask for your views now on, what stood out for you during the discussion, and hopefully we'll also get some thoughts from people on the floor. And I guess the idea is to see whether there are any key messages that might trigger ideas for next steps in this space, either by people working in this space independently or by this consortium. And I've got a few questions that the panel have been thinking about around how this consortium might need to evolve or what its future role will be as well. It's just a really practical issue we need to cover off as a group, is where to from here. So I'll go in that order and ask Helen, did you have any observations today you want to share?
I think my main observation starts off by saying well done to the team in Dunedin who've been organising today. It's been a really nice variety of presentations, which has largely kept to time and has been very interesting. So well done. I've really enjoyed the diversity of roles in the sector that have been talking. And I think that is possibly a highlight of the consortium, is getting a large number of people to find out where the synergies are. And this is a wonderful and a good thing. I think another thing that's leapt out to me is about data and how there is a tension between each group gathering the perfect data for its particular project and getting data that is transferable across projects. And there isn't necessarily a perfect answer to this, but something that needs to be grappled with. And a third thing would be, we are talking about an enormous variety of need that's going on here, from the houses in extreme need of very expensive makeovers, which is without a doubt an important part of the mahi, to the much larger number of houses in a lower degree of energy hardship, but which will still have pressing health consequences as a result. And whatever we do needs to be able to acknowledge all ends of the spectrum.
Thanks, Helen. Yeah, I think that reminds me of a comment that Chris Lambourne made about, we're thinking a lot about the energy transition and how to achieve equity in the future, but also that sort of urgent need right now and what to do about that. Is that really important to keep front of mind, and is very much of the focus of a lot of people's work here. That's probably a good segue to Gareth, who's sort of standing here on behalf of all of those community providers doing the mahi. Do you want to share some of your thoughts?
Yep, you two totally stole my thunder there. I had urgency, equity, and diversity were the three that stood out. I think the diversity one is challenging for us. There's little to no diversity in this room, and well, there's male and female, so that's good. But and I think we have Bettina and Jessica sort of on Zoom. I think we need. That's a considerable challenge for us as a sector to step up in that space, and not step up and do on behalf, but step up in terms of listening and understanding what a good partnership looks and feels like. I think the data perspective from the sort of maybe the community angle is like as you said, we've done a lot. We've got a lot of data sitting there. Some of it's good, some of it's probably not. We've got very limited funding to get that, and to get it consistently. So I guess we might need a discussion about the value of that data, and understanding that we're on the coalface there getting it. If you want good data, you need to pay us to help us to resource that to come through, and then that might improve improve the quality of it as well. And totally get that urgency. I spent a lot of time recently talking about equitable transition with climate change and what have you. And energy hardship is one of those core issues that needs to be resolved before we can do a good transition. So incredibly urgent and expensive, and it has to be done well.
Kia ora. I think not sort of go over comments that have already been made. Add to that urgency also the scale of the challenge that we're facing. This is an enormous challenge that I don't get the sense that the necessary resources and capacity are actually being pushed into addressing energy well-being in a manner that meets that challenge. So we really need to scale up what we're doing. I think on the positive side of things, one of the things that's come across the various presentations is the very real collaborations that do exist between Tāngata Whenua, between government, between civil society organizations, academics, the private sector, are finding interesting and sometimes innovative ways to come together to address the scale and scope of those challenges. And I think each of those various groups bring different capacities, resources, constraints, knowledge, and connections that helps us to move that idea, the idea of, or the goal of energy well-being forward. So I think that was a really sort of positive message that came out today.
Thank you, Sean. Gareth and Helen, I concur with what you've said. From a research and evaluation lens, often we get stuck in numbers and percentages, but I think it's important to remember that behind those stats are real people with real lived hardship, with real needs. And it gives more meaning to data when we know that change has been made at a certain level. So what really heartened me today was not just the evaluation side of things, but so many community projects going on, actually literally helping hundreds of people, probably even thousands now, which can be upscaled. And the opportunity to do that is real and it's presenting, and the urgency of it is only getting stronger and stronger. So with all you people here today, I think we are starting to make a difference, and probably let's not lose sight of those things when things are down, because things will pick up if we just keep the momentum going.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, I think there was a really good overview of the issues. I think we're all sort of picking up the same messages through the kōrero we've heard today. Does anyone from the floor want to add anything to that? We do have a microphone if everyone wants to share. Thank you, Scott. Always in.
There we go. Yeah, I'm. You can tell me to shut up as well. I'm quite happy to not talk. But
No, go ahead.
What I have been reflecting on is the way in which all of the fabric of thought and action is being woven more tightly together in the consortium over the past year, and it feels much more solid, and it feels much more positive. And I think that's a reflection of the intent with which people have participated and the desire that people have to make those connections. And I'm excited by it because it didn't come out of the electricity price review. We'll appoint an expert panel, we'll appoint a reference group. It came out of us. And it came out of a desire to make things, to try and solve those wicked problems. So I'm thinking about the importance of those online meetings that happen through the year. How can we make that continue? How can we hold this space open so that the work that comes out of it continues to inform and continues to be real information, not the other stuff for government, for policy change, and to connect policy to what's happening at the flax roots. So it feels a little bit on a knife edge, but really generally very positive and tighter than it's been.
Thanks, Scott. Oh, thanks, Janet. Jump in. Yeah, well, I think we're waiting. That feeds really nicely into the issues we want to discuss in a moment, which is how do we keep it, how do we make it sustainable, given that it is, this consortium collaboration is really based on goodwill and volunteer time, and no funding dedicated at the moment. But we'll come back to that after your comment, Janet.
Yeah, I would like to come back a bit later to talk about sort of the future of the consortium, but I just want to share a thought I was having this afternoon, and that is looking at the temporality of what we've got, the time depth of the problem that we're facing, and the different waves of generally, I guess, policy shifts or economic shifts through New Zealand that have led to the problem that we have today with energy poverty. And that's everything from colonisation itself to particular eras where there were a lot of houses being built, and those houses are naturally now meeting the end of their lives. Things like the neoliberal shift in the 1980s and 90s, which led to a lot of Māori families going back to land where they had nowhere to live, and so living in very poor circumstances. And actually the current shift that we've got at the moment with the impact of building standards that are building far less than appropriately coded buildings. Well, they might be up to code, but they're not actually fulfilling their function. So we've got another wave of problematic buildings sort of coming up behind us. And that makes me think about what's the new wave? What in the future, if we look forwards, are there going to be additional waves that are going to be pushing people into energy poverty? And one of those, I think, is climate change itself. And I think it really bodes us to think about what are the implications of climate impacts, flooding, So, I mean, to me, one of the things that this consortium can usefully do is to be aware of how different policies and different timeframes build up these kind of waves of impact on societies, and then what is coming up in the future that politically and as communities we need to be looking to, that we're going to have to respond to in terms of energy hardship.
Does anyone want to respond to that sort of question of what might be needed to future-proof those in energy hardship, you know, in or what is the scope for dealing with that issue in parallel to dealing with the urgency and the scale of the problem we have right now?
Say something there. We put a proposal to MB just a little while ago asking for an energy hardship or energy wellbeing sector network that sits outside government. And one of the key elements of that, which I couldn't take a leadership role on, was that there's no kaupapa Māori energy hardship network right now. And there should have been one 50 years ago, and there's not one now. So there's a group of about 5 or 6 organisations within CEN that are kaupapa Māori, and there's some others that are in the reference group, and there'll be others out there as well that could easily, I think, form a network and be probably with iwi support achieve quite considerable scale quite quickly. The fact that hasn't happened yet is bonkers. So that's one bit. I think that, you know, if we're going to hit some of these targets we want to hit, needs to be done quite urgently. I can't take a lead role in suggesting how that's done. I think it needs to be done by Māori.
I think just on the issue of temporality, clearly there's voices that haven't been engaged. And so I think that just reinforces to an even greater extent the need for flexibility and adaptability in terms of how we think of energy well-being, the frameworks we use, the definitions, the data that we rely on, because those things will change in a different context in the future, climate change, et cetera, but also as a result of the voices that have been missing thus far.
Mel, do you want to comment on the mining sectors and indicators work Indy's been doing?
I'll try. We are learning as we're going, especially through some of the providers we've partnered up with, because they have that capacity and capability. MB is really looking to build its own capabilities around Te Ao Maori lens on a number of factors, including the economy and business. And I think energy hardship has to be seen, or energy well-being has to be seen within a broader context, because the underlying factors such as income and poor housing and employment opportunities are things that go hand in hand in not just improving energy well-being, but just general overall social and cultural and environmental well-being. Yes, we are focused on energy well-being because that's where our expertise lie, but this gives us an opportunity to broaden our networks to see where opportunities may come in the greater scheme of things around emission reduction plans and so forth. There's a lot of work happening in decarbonization that is tied into energy hardship as well, or vice versa. Now, how much do we want to inform that type of work? You know, so there's decarbonization of industry, and certain areas are likely to be more impacted as we transition to a low emissions. And most of this iwi and hapu are already in deprivation. So we'll need to work with other partners working in some of the other more scientific areas and more bigger intensive policy areas that will inform uplifting society together. Yeah? So, yeah.
I was just thinking, I wonder if anyone online, Bettina, well, actually, Helen, yes, jump in if you've got a
yes, I'd just add briefly that with respect to temporality, if we go back and look at the building code since 1978, pretty much all of them have a little preamble at the start, say that these are the best guesses that they've been able to come up with doing a cost-benefit analysis considering energy prices. And I think what we can say from that is energy prices have consistently gone up far faster than anybody imagined when they were writing those building standards. And we have to assume things are going to continue to change in ways that we don't fully understand. And if we aim for just good enough, we will probably fail. We need to aim for better than just good enough.
Thank you, Helen. And that just reminds me as well that it's really exciting to see groups like PowerCo and Orion in the room now, because the work that has been shared from the supply side, from the industry, is really important in that regard too, I think, because they probably have the best visibility around where demand might go and where it will show up. So that partnership's really important, I think, in that. Yes, I wanted to give Bettina an opportunity to speak to that question of Māori representation in this, because I think, was it you, Bettina, that mentioned the need for a Māori energy forum?
No, I think it's been Gareth actually, and Aroha mā Gareth, that he did try to pull me in on that one, and I got a little bit stuck in my day-to-day mahi to give a decent reply. There are definitely challenges with establishing this Māori framework CEN. I think the biggest one is that we won't look at this issue in isolation. It'd need to be a holistic approach to wellbeing, which in essence is a whānau order model. So that we have a phrase here, so that there's one driveway up there's only one car going up the driveway, because when we look at the target demographic of whānau and even the general pop that we're trying to service and trying to create better outcomes for, how many service providers are they dealing with? How do we better educate our interface, so those first responders, so that they can be adequately resourced to, while they're doing the home assessment, that they're doing energy assessment as well, and while they're bringing in other social services, making sure that they're getting the warmer home subsidy. And that's something that we've really tried to collaborate with, but I do see lots of several work streams still not completely talking to each other. Also a little bit of a fear, and if there is a kaupapa Māori CNN established, how isolated then does it come from the mainstream? And how do we make sure that there's continual integration? And just one thing on the building code, there's been some recent research that showed approximately 40% of the new dwellings coming up in Taitokerau are unconsented. So I think that's definitely a future challenge that we will look to in our region. It's become unachievable for a lot of whānau returning back. 2/3 of the population since COVID that have returned back to Taitokerau are Māori, so building back on their ancestral land, it's unconsented, substandard, without, often we're talking about poor network, there is no network here, so there will be future challenges that arise just from that as well, just to add.
Yeah, well, we know it's not an easy problem to solve. Oh, there's a hand up in the audience. I'm going to run you the microphone.
Just to pick up the point about opportunities. So brands have said a new build in New Zealand, a new home in New Zealand is 5 to 8 times over its carbon budget. However, a retrofit home provides a much better return on reducing emissions per dollar. Where did the panel see potentially reducing carbon emissions as a lever to improve standard of housing?
There's a dedicated work stream within MB with its partners, like Ministry of Maori Development, looking exactly at that issue. So it's called Building for Climate Change. And the focus has been on houses. I'm very keen to hear a bit more about the stats you've said around the carbon intensity of new builds versus retrofits, because this is the kind of data we need to present to policymakers. And why is that? You know, we need to understand that thoroughly. So there's definitely a lot of action in this space. I think now would be a very good time to share those kind of insights, because like I said earlier, there's a lot of things connected that make people live in hardship. And we need to understand what they are and how we decipher them. And there are a lot of legacy issues as well that we need to resolve. So I'd be keen to hear what your thoughts are on sharing data with us, or you probably already have.
Just one comment. We kind of, well, I kind of struggle a bit with the emissions reduction versus adaptation, because we could probably quite logically argue we need to drastically increase our emissions in the short term to meet our energy hardship goals. You know, there's a lot of retrofits required. So yeah, we're talking about 100,000 or 200,000. Yeah, probably the quality of our homes, it's probably close to 1 million homes need to have something done to them. So if we're talking about that, in reality, that's a lot of emissions to achieve that. So I think we need to sort of try and get real with that a little bit and go, this is the journey we're on. We need to do that as efficiently as we can, but we need to recognise there's going to be an increase in emissions as we fix this interim problem. And we've got, Scott's had a crack at doing a climate safe house. It's a small house, but it's efficient and it's effective, and it's got that resiliency that I think we're going to need in a lot of flood-prone areas. So we need to look at how we can do that is at scale.
I'd add that one of the most exciting things about the Building for Climate Change programme is if you read the very high-level document that doesn't actually say all that much, somewhere in there it implicitly says that detailed energy modelling is going to be required for new houses, and to some extent at some point in the future for existing houses, in order to see if they meet the climate change goals or not. And what this means is that with a bit more effort and leveraging, those calculations could be turned into an energy certificate for houses, which then people could see and value when they choose what to, how much above code to build their house if they're building one, or if it gets shared beyond the point of building, then people get to value living in an energy efficient house or a low carbon house in ways that it is just not apparent right now. And especially for people like new migrants, if you imagine coming to New Zealand and trying to figure out what kind of house to live in. There's a reason, I mean, there are undoubtedly a number of reasons that migrants end up in poor quality housing, but one of them has to be simply not knowing how to read the vernacular and what's going to be a cold house in winter and what isn't. And if we give people the opportunity to actually look at it and say, this one's of the B quality standard, this one's only a D, as the first talk, the keynote speaker this morning was talking about, that's a really valuable tool in getting people to change.
Yeah, absolutely. That starting off the day with hearing how the UK is doing it, certainly I probably wasn't the only one who felt a bit jealous about the sort of data that they have on the housing stock over there, and the powerful tool that becomes for targeting support to the houses, the families that need it the most. But there was an interesting sort of way into the problem as well, to build in an emissions factor into that sort of scheme. I know that housing certification has been proposed by the current government, hasn't been progressed. So it does seem like it might be an interesting item to add to the consortium's list of issues, which is something that Miranda has pointed to in her comment here. So I'll just read it out for everyone at the back, might not be able to see it. Miranda Struthers from ERAN says, a great range of projects presented at today's symposium. Thanks to all presenters. Following Janet's question for the panel, is there an opportunity to incorporate an equitable energy transition into the terms of reference for the consortium's work? I think that's a great idea. Definitely something around that future proofing and thinking about how to sort of have that forward looking lens as well as the current mahi there is to do. I think that would be great. Does anyone else have any views on that in the room?
It's more just a question, but I guess I've just seen there's this equitable transition strategy and consultation and stuff all coming out, and I'm not quite sure how everybody will engage in that, how the consortium might engage in it, what that means for this group. So it's a thought.
Yeah, that's a good point. So there are a number of processes underway right now in government, aren't there, that are looking at that sort of high level forward thinking. One is the energy strategy work that you've just mentioned. And I think the job of the people in this working in this space is probably to make sure that's on the radar for the energy strategy work. And I know there's some dialogue starting to support that energy strategy. So I think that would be really important to feed in. And you've also mentioned the just transitions dialogues that are happening, possibly another opportunity to feed in your experience, Gareth. Has energy hardship been on the radar at all in the just transition?
Yeah, I've put it on. Yeah, the bit that I've been engaging in is there's been 3 workshops being conducted through Motu. They were funded by MB to do those workshops, and there's going to be a guide that comes out of that for people to read and understand. I know that the just transition, the term gets used interchangeably, I guess. The just transition team are going to have a draft strategy middle of next year for consultation. I think they're getting a lot of feedback that the normal consultation process isn't going to work for this one. And I think there's funds available for proper engagement by various groups. So I guess we'll find out soonish what that looks like, feels like. But yeah, I love the suggestion. It from Miranda, from my point of view, the consortium is probably maybe happy to be proved wrong, but it feels like it might be reaching its capacity in its current form, in terms of the volunteer time and expertise. So maybe a bit of a challenge there to, what does the next version of the consortium look like? One that's properly funded and has got a proper secretariat and has got some program parameters and scope and scale and some ambition there. I think the equitable transition totally fits in that.
There's a lot of streams of discussion there around how to engage better with Māori wellbeing frameworks and also how to engage with the sort of future-proofing piece. So I'm just wondering if there are any other big issues like that we want to draw out before we move on to picking up on that question about sustainability of the consortium. Yeah, Scott's got one. Because I think those two issues at least are going to have to go on our list of things that this group should continue to think about and deal with.
I've been thinking while everyone's been talking, and I'm speaking as a Pākehā working in a kaupapa Māori organisation. So one of the things that I put up earlier was the Healthy Homes, Healthy Whānau work stream that we've got with those three different programs we're working on, and the additional one that we want to bring in there, the climate safe housing component we want to bring in there next year and the year after. And what we want, what would be good is if the experience that we have at the Flax Roots doing the mahi was something that could inform government process so that we can streamline and work together more effectively. And if we could see more ambition for more adaptive governance in government agencies, more experimental, more slightly more risk-taking, and in our colleagues in industry, in the industry bodies, to try and deliver a more collaborative way of working. Because I think we need to stop thinking about housing and start thinking about shelter when we think about climate risk. We need to provide shelter for people because we have to move away from the coast. We have to move away from flood hazard zones. We have to provide shelter when we do so. And we don't want to be throwing money anymore at homes that need to be demolished. We can't afford to spend limited resources in that carbon budget on homes that should not be lived in. And yet, Te Puni Kokiri is a critical home repairs program. We can get money for home repairs. We can't take that same budget and put it towards new build where it needs to, and replacement. We've got to use it on home repairs, and we don't want to do that. We have homes that can't be repaired in any sensible way. They need to be rebuilt or replaced. So, and all of that, I'm thinking about that in our just transition work as well, because one of the things that Ōkaha does is aim to provide jobs for Māori, training in new technology and clean tech and emissions reduction in climate action. And we can do that. We've got all the plans and models in place, but how do we partner, and how do other organizations like ours partner with government and with industry to make those things happen? Because this is a collective responsibility we've got, and we know what to do, but we can't quite get all the parts in place.
Thanks, Scott. Well, I think again, we should think about how this consortium could be a channel for that sort of collaboration and trust building. But let's hear from Leanna.
Yeah, I think just to tautaku that, Scott, like the flexibility of funding is what's really important. We at Habitat have developed a new home prototype called OERC, which is based on marae, papakainga land living that is transportable, tiny home type, but higher spec. We've had some interest from Te Puni Kokiri, some interest from MSD. You're talking about solar panels, water collection, battery storage on a unit, as well as homes that you can connect into. And it actually, in some cases, what we would prefer is to have a contract where we could say, we go to that home, actually it's $130,000 and we can put that on instead, because that's a better use of money. Or in this case, we fix the roof and do the bathroom, or in this case, they only need curtains and minor repairs. So, but the way our funding streams are set up and contracts are set up is that individual programs. We've worked hard at collating and collecting funders into a funnel for a Healthy Homes program. That's taken 2 years to say, actually, feed into this. What we need is across the whole system. This is the toolbox. These are the options. This is the best use of funding for whānau. And there's many community organisations and charities that are doing great stuff in this space. And so it's a bit of, how do we get flexibility of funding, trust us to show you that we know what we're doing and that we've got whānau at the front of our minds, and then show you with robust evaluation and outcomes that we're making a difference. So I think how we do that cross-sectorally, and with Ministry of Health, MHUD, MSD, MB, they're all organisations that we have touch points to, and we've got some cross-sector and agency integration, but we need to do it more and with funding that's more collective, and it allows a bit more flexibility, certainly from a community organisation space.
Thanks, Leanna. Oh, yeah.
Just picking up on your point, I think, and I was talking to Scott at lunch about this, is the consortium does not actually have a good repository of all the programs that are underway in New Zealand right now. We know a few large ones. We know of the ones that people come and talk to us about. But I think one thing we as a consortium could do is create a sort of a database where we know actually what's happening, and even understanding where is the funding being targeted and where the gaps are likely to come up, current gaps and future gaps. I don't think it will take too much to do that, but there's several ways of tackling it. But I think it will enhance our conversation with key policy stakeholders when the time comes, providing them what we know and where we see the opportunities.
I just want to jump in straight away and say we do actually have a project a bit like that already underway through the Energy Hardship Reference Group, where that crowdsourcing of information about what programs are happening has been done and is actually going to go up on the MB website soon. What we don't have, though, is that sort of gaps analysis. So that would be a really interesting next step for that work. And I think that that sort of stock take of programs that has been done was as much for MB's sort of learning process to figure out what is actually going out in that huge myriad of different projects that are underway. But yeah, how could we actually make it more useful to then channel funding to the right places? Gareth.
Yep, and I just wanted to, what Leanna and Scott said, tautoko that. I think that regional response and delivery is critical, and probably the approach for how that could be done is to have outcomes-based contracts that are long-term but iterative. So you have funding certainty, 5 years minimum, but understand that every 6 months or every year there's a renegotiation of what the outcomes, what we've learned, and then what outcomes are we after in the next year, and really trust, invest in so that it's there, a regional network, and then really trust them to get on with it. I understand the risk profile that sounds risky from a national point of view, but I genuinely don't think we're going to hit the targets we need to hit unless that's done. Yep, and just on that stock take stuff, I've been a little bit resistant to that idea, in that it's got to be useful in an ongoing way rather than just a snapshot. So if we're going to do that stock take and we're going to build up that gap analysis, then it's got to be something that's got a legacy, something that continues into the future. So that will, you know, we're in a very resource constrained space right now, unless we've got funding and resourcing to really fly at that and make it a long-term program, then community organizations are going to be a little bit hesitant to engage in that sort of activity.
Yeah, I think that the durability, or so what you're saying is that for the stock take exercise to be useful, it has to be live and updated, and the question then becomes who's going to do that, right? And actually that probably comes back to the question that this panel was set up around of what's the role for the consortium. So is that the sort of thing that I guess what all of these comments are pointing to is the absence of a sort of strong body with the voice to speak, or the authority to speak on behalf of all of the expertise that's in this room and out there. And the consortium has sort of been performing that role informally for the last couple of years. But how do we make that more permanent? Because listening to Scott and Leanne, I was thinking about that, and Gareth reiterated again about that need for a communication sort of channel between all of the expertise that's out there in the community and government, how to get those messages through and to build the trust so that there could be more flexibility. And I'm thinking this sort of consortium could be a vehicle for that, if we wanted it to be, where collectively there's sort of a strength in numbers that could help government to feel safe about taking some risks, knowing that, you know, whatever was being proposed was supported by the experience of this many people, rather than it being a sort of one-to-one relationship with a small organization that government might not know very well. So perhaps that could be one of the functions. So we've only got 10 minutes left. So let's spend the next 10 minutes just talking about the role of the consortium, what it could do next, and yeah, who might be best placed to lead that. Is your comment a little bit in that direction, Mel? And Sean? Sean first.
I don't have an answer for that question, but more just building off your last comment around also an opportunity to be more proactive in this space. Often we're sort of reacting and chasing government and chasing programs and trying to figure out what's going on, rather than setting the agenda, given we know the challenge that we're facing, we know the urgency. How can we co-design something in advance rather than trying to evaluate things after the fact?
I probably have a question more than a solution. I just want to better understand how we can develop and link what we are doing with the energy hardship reference group, because that has formal standing. I understand it has resourcing as well of some sort. How do we join up where we can leverage resources and make it a bit more formal? Because we all know we're doing this on our own back, pretty much. Yeah. And it can't continue for that long, you know. We still got the enthusiasm, we still got the need, we still got the drive. How do we link up with something formal like the energy reference group? What could that look like, you know?
Just on that, yeah, the reference group is it's been an interesting group to be on, and I think the MB team have received quite a bit of feedback there. There's definitely a willingness to fire up and do more. Resourcing is pretty minimal. I think it's resourcing people, secretariat, which is fine, but it is pretty much relying on voluntary efforts still. So yeah, I think we just probably need to get real a little bit with that and fund it properly.
Yeah, the irony of the reference group is that although it's more formal, it's actually sort of currently directed by MB, convenes that group and sets the agenda. And just hearing all of this quoted now, it makes me think, you know, the beauty of this group is that it's actually led and convened by, and the issues are populated by the people who are actually working in the sector. And that's sort of ironic, you know. Yeah, the formal group should be the one that's got the drive and got the knowledge and got the ability to set its own agenda. So there probably is an opportunity there to provide that feedback of that, you know, how do we merge those two functions so that you get one much more effective group. So that raises the other question I wanted to put to everybody about sort of who best to lead such a group. If it was to be this consortium, but with more formal standing, with some funding, ideally, with some kind of clear mandate, is that a government activity, or is that better housed in the NGO sector or even in academia, given that we're talking about the evaluation piece and giving government confidence that there is data and evidence behind what's being proposed? Does anyone want to share a view on which one of those sort of places this should be housed? Helen, do you have a view on that?
Yes, I think partly it's going to be a whole pile of different organizations going, not me. If we look at it, the governments change and government policies change, and governments are sadly driven, at least partly, by the need to be elected in the next election. And this means that in the past, we've known that good data has ceased to be collected when, not necessarily in the energy space, but in other related spaces, when it was going to show up something that would be difficult for the government in question. And so I think if we're talking about something that we want to be long-term and that gets to critique government policy and say this needs to be better, we can't expect it to happen in the government space. It's unrealistic. And in the NGO space, I believe that people are really stretched right now. And I think maybe asking NGOs to host a consortium like this without funding is going one step too far on a stretched sector. I'm very willing to be told I'm wrong on that one. And that leaves it with academia, which is in an uneasy place between the two in some ways. I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer than that.
Thank you. Good observations, though. I'll pass it to Janet. You got a different view or the same?
I think I'd first like to make an observation, and that is that when we set up the idea of actually just having a conversation across different people involved in energy hardship type activities, because there was an absence of similar approaches to evaluation. I mean, that was quite simply the idea. What has grown out of that has been astonishing. The interest in different groups across flax roots organisations, community organisations, Māori organisations, academics, and also government agencies and the energy sector has been really surprising. And it's like there was a huge hunger to have these conversations, to make these linkages, to actually talk about energy hardship, energy well-being, and ultimately the energy transition in a much more joined up way than we have in the past, and a much more inclusive way, in a way that's inclusive of the huge diversity that we're aware of amongst the actors here. And so I think what I'm saying here is I do believe what you're hinting at, that first of all, the purpose of this consortium has expanded just because of this kind of upswelling of interest in having these conversations and making these connections and sharing what we do, because fragmentation of activity is the enemy of disaster. And purely top-down activity is also not what we want. This is very much a bottom-up activity, but we need to connect to the top-down side of things. And so I think this whatever it is, this network of people and organisations is critically important for New Zealand's transition. And where I kind of am tending to place the responsibility is that what we're talking about here is incredibly important to government. It is a real priority to address energy hardship. It's also a real priority at the moment to address the transition, whatever the transition is. And here we're talking about, climate change, we're talking about energy, we're talking about decarbonisation, lots and lots of things. And so, to my way of thinking, this does need some kind of ongoing funding or oversight or secretariat to help it happen. It's not going to happen by itself. And Nina, I just pay huge respect to you for all the hard work you've done, probably in your evenings after your kids have gone to bed, keeping this going. But I think that the government does have a really critical responsibility here, and it does have a very strong interest that is more than a political cycle. This is going to outlive political cycles. Kia ora.
Thank you, Janet. Yeah, is it like funding needs to come from government, but maybe the work of sort of, not the work, but the leadership of the group might be able to sit somewhere else? And actually, in thinking about how do you get funding, I'm thinking of what your comment, Shirley, about strategy and about the idea of sort of if we could get energy hardship built into some of the longer term strategy, maybe that would enable some funding to be sort of untouchable through political change, maybe.
Yeah, I've been thinking about Kim Stanley Robinson, who I recommend everyone reads, the Mars Trilogy and Ministry for the Future, sci-fi. The point he makes, or the optimistic future he holds, is essentially decentralized decision making and creativity, so that there's not one way to conquer something that's decentralized. It's spread out. And that, if we think about distributed energy resources, that's what we are as the consortium. We're distributed energy resources. So what we want is enough resourcing to hold that space open, but we want to control it and we want to drive it. And it's not going to sit within government. It's not going to sit within NGOs. It's not going to sit within academia. It'll rotate. It'll rotate around those spaces and out. So it shouldn't just be in those three spaces. So I think somehow we've got to be active enough to secure what would be relatively minimal resourcing to ensure that we can cover off the cost of maintaining the hub, but the hub will shift as needs be and should endure to keep the collective working and decentralized in a way that we can keep pushing and delivering for the transition that we all want to see, because we don't have time to hope that someone else is going to do it. We have to do it, but I think there's a way to do it. I think there's a way to do it.
Hi, C. Would you like to speak to your comment, or shall I read it out?
Hi. I'm happy for you to read it out. Or I can just speak to it. I just want to tautoko what most people have already said. It's a tough thing to put it into a specific stakeholders segment, because I think what's really important is to ensure that there is not just a perception, but an actual neutrality, and not a kind of status or hierarchy issue as well. And again, it's maybe more about perceptions than the actual reality of the people that are involved. But yeah, you know, resourcing, it always comes down to resourcing. But I think what's really important is that it's seen as not something where there could be a conflict in mandates. So yeah, I don't really have an answer either, other than it probably needs to be a consortium that's well resourced.
Yeah,
Probably
that's a good observation though. Yeah, because we don't want to exacerbate power structures that have sort of led to energy hardship in the first place, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's 5 o'clock and Mel has to go and get a plane. So we're going to leave it there, even though I feel like we could probably keep, at least I could enjoy this for a lot longer. Do you want to make a last comment, panel members? Yeah, I'm going to let Mel go first though, because then you can run off if you need to.
I'd just like to thank everyone who presented today for all the great mahi you're doing. And I'm very encouraged to see this landscape changing from where we started 3 years ago to where things are right now. So let's just keep the momentum going. Some great ideas coming forward. So let's keep the corridor going. Kia ora. And see you guys maybe in Wellington next time.
Kia ora. Just sort of echo that, all the people that have been involved with the consortium and have stepped up to chair or co-chair some of the working groups, and some people stepped up to do that for one meeting cycle and were stuck repeatedly, Mel. There is quite a lot of work that has gone on, and I think it speaks to the value that we all place in these having these conversations and keeping them going.
I'm feeling, I must admit, a little bit frustrated. I wanted some action out of this. So in my comment on that last piece around, you know, where it should sit and that sort of thing, it definitely needs to be co-governed, I think, across all of those sectors. I've got a little pushback on independence. I don't think you can achieve the sort of leadership we need and be fully independent. We're not big enough for that, New Zealand. I think we need to have very high transparency around the actions and decisions that are made, and you know, a lot of accountability too. So I think those are key features. I would love for an action out of this is for that to be drawn up and for us to circulate what that could look like and ask for opinion from everyone in the consortium, but also, yeah, our networks, we've probably got people out there who have an opinion on that. And I really like the possibility of the final order model being extended here. That sounds pretty cool.
Are you volunteering, Gareth? Well, actually, I'm just thinking about, you made a comment about the idea that CN's already put forward around a sector network. And, you know, maybe that idea could provide a building block to start thinking about how these different activities could intersect in one place. But I'm happy to work with you and other interested people to develop something based on what's come through. I'll give Helen a chance to make a last comment before I wrap it up.
Thanks. I would just like to say, as others have said, I think it's been a wonderful day of presentations. I think that possibly the Energy Wellbeing Evaluation Consortium, we're not just talking about evaluation, and maybe evaluation is now a subgroup of what we're talking about rather than the overarching. And any independent agency is only as independent as its funding, and if the funding comes from government or from industry, then it's not that independent. So yes, an ability to survive a lack of funding is a wonderful thing. That's me, thank you.
Thanks, Helen. Okay, well, we'll wrap it up there. I am personally really excited by the discussion that we've had even just this afternoon, because you can really tell the step change in the scope of the thinking that the space that everybody's operating, the level that everyone's operating at. So last year we came out with the actions that we needed to collaborate on data indicators, frameworks, and building diversity. That's still definitely, all of those are still live actions, but this year we're talking sort of next level about future focus, about integrating kaupapa Māori wellbeing frameworks, and about creating like a collaborative co-design kind of model for engaging with government, which all seems, yeah, very next level and very important to me. So thank you all very much for participating today, to the presenters and those of you who attended and listened and provided thought-provoking questions, and to everyone online who's endured a whole day of looking at the screen. And I will take the action to write up the things that have come out of this discussion today, and I will probably be shoulder tapping a few people to help me sort of turn it into an action plan. That we may well be able to, I'd propose feeding it into the expert panels, energy hardship expert panels process as a possible way forward that they could help to support through their recommendations cycle. Okay, so with that, let's close. We'll release Mel to go off to the airport and all of you to, yeah, get a bit of fresh air, enjoy the sunshine outside. Thanks, guys.
And just finally, 9 a.m. Tomorrow morning for the next day. And also anyone who doesn't know where the dinner is, if you wait around, I'll take you there.